Word number 3 is zaxwen. So we start off with a Z. So Z is a letter that sounds differently than it does in English. Like in English we have a word like zoo, but in xa'isla, instead of saying something like zoo, you can imagine that there's a D in front of this Z, so it would sound more like zoo. So you start off with a D sound and then zoo. So the way that we're creating this sound is we're taking the tip of our tongue, putting it against our alveolar ridge. That's where it starts. That's what's making the D sound. And then we relax our tongue to make the Z. Once we release that sound, our tongue kind of comes down again. So we're starting off with kind of a D and then a Z sound. Z. Z. The next letter is A. So A can sound differently depending on what letters are around it. In this case, A makes kind of an ah sound. So the first letter was a Z, making kind of a Z sound. Then we have A, put them together, you have Z. The next letter is an X, but it also has a rounded sound. That's the W here. So the purpose of this little raised W, it tells us that this is not a regular X. What we're going to be doing is rounding the sound of this X. So X in xa'isla does not sound like the X in English. So it's not like the word axe. That's where you get kind of a X sound. The X in xa'isla sounds more like an H. So we're making a H sound. And also what we're doing is we're rounding that H. So rounding basically means we're using our lips. So our lips are going to come out into more of a rounded shape. And we'll be making kind of a W sound. So we start off with H, and then once it comes out of your lips, it makes kind of a W sound. So putting them together, it sounds like wh, wh. The next letter is an E. E is what's called a schwa. It doesn't really have a set sound of its own. It can change depending on what's around it. So in this case, we're going from a rounded X, starting off with a rounded X, ending with an N. So basically, it kind of sounds like I, zaxwen. So we're starting off with a and then we're going to n. So basically, the way that it shapes the sound of this E is we're going from one sound to another. The I sound is basically what makes it easier to go between these two sounds here. So if this was more of an we'd be going zaxwen, which is a little bit harder to pronounce. Zaxwen. So these two letters here around the E kind of shape this sound. So it's easier to go zaxwen. When. Zaxwen. Now we'll do a linguistic breakdown of the word. So we have a Z, A, X, a small W, E, N, and we're going to separate the syllables. And we're also going to place a small slanted line over the A in the word. So Z sounds like Z. So we have kind of a D in front of it. Z. Then we have the A. So we have an acute accent over top of the A. So since this A is with the Z, they create a syllable, and this tells us we're going to put more emphasis on this first syllable. It's going to be a higher tone. So we're going to say zaxwen. So the first syllable is going to be more emphasized than the second one. Then we have the X here, which sounds like h. And the W tells us that it's rounded. So this is a rounded X. So the X sounds like h. But before we make that sound, we're rounding our lips. That's what the small W tells us to do. So it sounds like h. The E sounds like the I in kit. And then we have N, which is a regular N, like in English. So you put them together, you get wh, and then you have N at the end. So the sound joining them is kind of an I sound, so you have when. When. Put them together, you have za, when. Za, when. Za, when. This is very different than what I see people writing a lot of the times or saying. A lot of the times I'll hear something like zaxwen. This is not a proper spelling or pronunciation because we're not getting the same sounds. So j is not the same as z. It's close, but it's not exactly the same. Z, there's very subtle differences between the two of them, but the proper pronunciation is z, z, not j. And the A basically makes an sound here. So a lot of times people will use a U, but if you're following the xa'isla orthography, U would sound like U. So this would actually sound like juquin. If you pronounce it the way it's spelled, it would say juquin. That's not the proper way to say it, so we spell it this way, z. The K is different than, we have a regular K here and a W. These are separate letters. They're very different than the rounded X. The W is part of the X and makes a h sound. So we have h instead of qu here. The E does very much sound like the I here, I. So we do kind of have like a win sound, but it's connected to the X, so it's more like when. So that's the reason that zaxwen is spelled this way and pronounced that way, and not this way.